You know, we live in a world where almost everything feels, well, completely invisible. Think about it for a second.
Right.
You click a button on your phone, and capital just moves across the globe in milliseconds. Or you stream a 4K movie from a server sitting on another continent, and it plays flawlessly in your living room.
Yeah, it's seamless.
It all feels so wireless,
Yeah.
so incredibly abstract. I mean, we walk around operating under this assumption that physical geography doesn't really matter anymore, right? That we've kind of engineered our way out of the constraints of the physical map.
It is a very persistent collective illusion.
Yeah.
We've built this incredibly complex global economy, and because the interfaces we interact with, our phones, our trading terminals, our laptops, because they're digital, we assume the economy itself is just this untouchable thing floating in the cloud.
Exactly.
We completely forget the massive, grinding physical infrastructure underneath it all.
It feels clean, it feels digital, but then a couple of diplomats sitting in a room fail to reach an agreement. Tensions spike between two nations. And suddenly, defense ministers, energy traders, and ordinary citizens all over the earth are staring at a very specific, very narrow, very physical strip of water on a map. And in a matter of hours, that digital illusion entirely shatters.
Because suddenly that narrow strip of water reminds us that our abstract world is actually entirely dependent on massive steel ships moving millions of barrels of heavy liquid across the ocean.
Right.
Every single day.
Right.
When the physical supply chain is threatened, the digital economy stops mattering very quickly.
It really does. Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. If you are joining us today, I am so thrilled to have you here. Today, we are looking at a brief but incredibly dense and high-stakes set of events, the Hormuz crisis.
It's a big one.
It is. Our mission for you today is singular. We are going to unpack how a localized diplomatic failure between the United States and Iran can instantly, and I mean instantly, threaten the wallets of people all over the globe.
And my goal today is to synthesize the timeline of this standoff for you. We're going to trace the causal chain from the initial political tension right down to the tangible geographic threat.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, and finally, out to the sweeping global macroeconomic anxiety that follows. We are moving from the abstract space of high-level diplomacy into the very real, very heavy consequences for everyday global commerce.
It is a wild domino effect, and it moves fast.
Okay.
Let's unpack this. So following the collapse of recent peace talks between the United States and Iran, tensions have rapidly escalated.
Right.
The failure to reach an agreement prompted President Donald Trump to issue a direct warning stating that strong action could be taken against Iran. Now, quick pause here. Just to be totally clear to you listening, our job today is just to impartially report on the breakdown of these talks and the warnings that followed. We are just relying on the facts of the source text to understand the geopolitical dynamic here, not taking any political sides whatsoever.
Absolutely. We are just analyzing the structure of a geopolitical standoff. And the structure here begins with a fundamental breakdown in communication. The peace talks failed, and that failure immediately birthed a warning of severe yet totally undefined consequences.
It's such a drastic escalation. It kind of makes me think of a really high-stakes corporate negotiation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, imagine you have two massive corporate entities sitting in a boardroom. They are trying to hash out a merger or maybe settle a massive existential lawsuit. It's tense, but they are talking. There are rules.
Right, there's a protocol.
Exactly. Then one party decides they are completely done. They stand up, they walk away from the table, but instead of just going back to their headquarters to regroup, they immediately threaten to lock all the doors to the building so no one can leave.
Wow.
It escalates from a conversation to a structural threat in a matter of seconds. So I have to ask you, how does that rapid pivot, from failed peace talks directly to warnings of strong action fundamentally change the pressure of this international standoff?
Well, what's fascinating here is the psychological weight of the diplomatic void that gets left behind. You see, when diplomacy is active, even if it is highly adversarial, there is a framework.
Right.
There are established rules of engagement. There is a table that both sides are sitting at, and usually back-channel communications are keeping the temperature regulated. But when peace talks completely fail, that entire framework just collapses.
Guardrails are totally gone.
Exactly. We aren't just back to the status quo. We're thrust into a completely unpredictable space. And into that void, the U.S. administration introduces the warning of strong action.
Which is super vague.
Very. Now, notice that the warning doesn't specify what that action is. In international relations, that ambiguity is strategically crucial. It's a concept known as strategic ambiguity.
Okay.
Strong action could mean crippling economic sanctions. It could mean targeted military strikes. Or it could mean a massive cyber intervention against power grids. By deliberately not defining the exact nature of the consequence, the pressure is magnified exponentially.
Wait, let me challenge that premise for a second.
Go for it.
If you want to deter an adversary, wouldn't it be far more effective to draw a clear red line? Like to say, if you do X, we will drop a bomb on Y. It seems like ambiguity would just lead to miscalculation rather than actual pressure.
It's a great point, and it's actually a constant debate in game theory.
Yeah.
But here is why strategic ambiguity is often preferred in these specific flashpoints.
Why is that?
If you draw a highly specific red line, your adversary only has to prepare a defense for that one specific scenario. They can allocate all their resources to protecting target Y.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but if you simply threaten strong action, you force their defense ministries and intelligence agencies to spin up contingencies for a dozen different worst-case scenarios simultaneously. You force them to spread their resources, their attention, and their political capital incredibly thin.
So they have to be paranoid about everything at once. You essentially paralyze them with the infinite possibilities of the threat.
Precisely.
They have to defend the cyber front, the economic front, and the military front all at the exact same time.
Right. And paranoia in international relations is exactly what causes regional tensions to skyrocket. The failure of the agreement is now inextricably linked to this looming, undefined threat. It creates a ticking clock.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The pressure in the region is no longer just about finding a peaceful resolution to whatever initially brought them to the table. It's about avoiding an undefined, potentially catastrophic event.
Which brings us out of the abstract realm of political warnings and directly into the physical world, because that undefined catastrophe has a very specific geographic focal point in this crisis.
It does.
The immediate massive concern stemming from this tension is the potential blocking of the Strait of Hormuz.
That is the geographic reality that anchors this entire crisis. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a body of water. It is arguably the most critical artery in the global energy system.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the source notes that this strait is a key route for global oil supply. It handles a massive percentage of it. Think of it like the only toll booth on a massive interstate highway.
That's a good way to look at it.
If that one toll booth gets blocked, the entire system backs up for hundreds of miles. The global supply chain just jams instantly. But let me push back here again.
Sure.
You're calling this the ultimate geographic bargaining chip, but it's not the 1970s anymore. We're talking about modern nations.
Right.
The U.S. is a massive net exporter of oil now. We have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Renewables are making up a larger share of the energy grid every year. Are we really still as utterly vulnerable to a single Middle Eastern maritime choke point as we were 50 years ago?
It is a totally valid question, and honestly, it's a misconception a lot of people have when they look at domestic energy production. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it all comes down to how global commodities markets actually function. It is absolutely true that the U.S. produces far more of its own energy today, but oil is a globally fungible commodity.
Meaning a barrel of oil is a barrel of oil no matter where it's pulled from the ground.
Exactly. And the global price of that barrel is determined by global supply and global demand. The Strait of Hormuz sees roughly a fifth of the world's daily oil consumption pass through its waters every single day.
A fifth?
Yeah, we're talking about roughly 20 million barrels a day. If someone parks a few naval vessels or drops maritime mines across that 21-mile-wide choke point, that 20 million barrels vanishes from the global market instantly.
Wow. And even if those specific barrels weren't destined for the United States, the sudden absence of them creates a massive supply shock everywhere else.
That's the mechanism, because suddenly all the countries in Asia and Europe that relied on the oil flowing through Hormuz have to buy their oil from somewhere else. They start bidding up the price of oil from the North Sea, from West Africa, and yes, from the Gulf of Mexico.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So even if a U.S. citizen is pumping gasoline refined from oil drilled in Texas, the price of that gasoline is going to skyrocket because the global benchmark for crude just shot through the roof. You simply cannot isolate a domestic energy market from a global supply shock of that magnitude.
That is a brilliant way to explain it. The physical oil might not cross our borders, but the price shock crosses every border instantly.
Exactly.
But what about alternatives? Again, looking at the modern infrastructure we have, aren't there pipelines that can just bypass the strait? I mean, why must it go on ships?
There are some pipelines. Saudi Arabia has the East-West pipeline, and the UAE has a pipeline that bypasses the strait to reach the Gulf of Oman. But combined, they only have a few million barrels of excess capacity.
So not nearly enough.
Not even close. They cannot physically handle the 20 million barrels that typically transit the strait on very large crude carriers, or VLCCs. We often get so caught up in the idea of modern power, cyber capabilities, satellites, air superiority, that we forget how utterly dependent the global economy is on physical movement. You cannot reroute 20 million barrels of heavy crude through a digital server. It has to go on specialized, enormous ships. And those ships have to navigate the topography of the Earth's oceans.
And the Earth's topography hasn't changed just because our technology has. The strait is still a natural choke point.
It is the ultimate geographic leverage. Waterways like this don't care about the size of a nation's cyber command. When you highlight the possible blocking of this strait, you are highlighting the fact that controlling a physical bottleneck is often vastly more powerful than traditional military posturing.
That is wild.
You don't need to defeat an adversary's entire military apparatus if you can simply put a padlock on the one door the global economy needs to walk through to survive.
It's the ultimate asymmetric advantage. A nation could be entirely outgunned in traditional military terms, but if they have the geographic proximity and the capability to disrupt that one specific transit lane, they hold the entire global economy hostage.
And the mere threat of that blockage, not even the actual blockage, just the credible threat of it, is a form of leverage that forces every single nation on Earth to pay attention. It transforms a localized diplomatic failure into a structural threat to the global machine.
Which perfectly explains the immediate economic shockwave that follows. Because the reality is, if this blocking happens, fuel prices are going to increase around the world. So what does this all mean to you listening right now? It means that a diplomatic standoff happening thousands of miles away isn't just an abstract headline. It fundamentally alters the macroeconomic reality of your daily life. But the wild part is, the financial impact starts before a single ship is actually stopped, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The global financial system does not wait for the water to actually be blocked. The moment peace talks fail and strong action is threatened, the oil futures markets react.
They price it in.
Yes, exactly. Algorithms and commodity traders immediately begin pricing in the risk of a supply disruption. At the same time, maritime insurance underwriters in London and New York look at the rising geopolitical tension and instantly spike the insurance premiums for any commercial vessel sailing into the Persian Gulf.
Because the risk of a tanker getting caught in a crossfire just went up exponentially.
Spot on. And who pays for that massive spike in insurance premiums? The shipping companies don't just eat that cost. They pass it on to the refineries.
Right.
The refineries pass it on to the distributors, and the distributors pass it right down to the consumer at the pump. So the price of energy rises simply based on the probability of conflict.
And it doesn't stop at the gas station either. I mean, oil isn't just fuel for cars. It's the foundational energy source for the entire physical world.
It really is.
Increased crude prices mean increased bunker fuel costs for the cargo ships bringing electronics from Asia. It means higher jet fuel costs for air freight. It drives up the cost of petrochemicals used in plastics and the fertilizers used in global agriculture. A spike in crude oil isn't just an energy problem, it is a base inflation problem that cascades through every single physical good on the planet. Which is exactly why global leaders are actively urging both sides to stay calm and avoid conflict. The international response is immediate and desperate because the macroeconomic stakes are so incredibly high.
That is the part of this dynamic that really gets me. You have presidents, prime ministers, and heads of state from entirely different continents.
Yeah.
Leaders of nations that have absolutely nothing to do with the initial diplomatic dispute, urgently begging for calm. Doesn't that highlight a terrifying helplessness among the international community? It essentially proves that the vast majority of the world is just a bystander to its own economic survival. This raises an important question about the true nature of global interconnectivity. For decades, we have praised the globalized economy for its hyper-efficiency. We engineered a system where supply chains are optimized to the razor's edge.
Right.
But this crisis exposes the dark side of that exact efficiency, which is extreme systemic vulnerability. When global leaders urge calm, It exposes the fact that they are essentially powerless to protect their own domestic economies from external shocks.
They are bystanders with their entire national GDPs on the line.
Precisely. Imagine being the leader of a manufacturing-heavy economy in Asia, or a massive exporting nation in the European Union. You have your own domestic policies, your own carefully managed inflation targets, your own citizens to care for.
Yeah.
And suddenly your entire economic stability is violently threatened because of a localized disagreement between two other nations over a waterway you have absolute zero jurisdiction over. You can't send in your own military to force the U.S. and Iran to sign an agreement. You can't magically invent a new shipping route across the Arabian Peninsula.
All you can do is issue diplomatic statements and hope that the two parties involved realize the global collateral damage they are about to cause.
It is a profound state of dependency. The international leaders stepping in so quickly aren't necessarily intervening out of a pure desire for world peace. They are intervening for their own economic self-preservation.
That makes total sense.
They know that if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, the resulting spike in fuel prices will trigger rampant inflation, disrupt their manufacturing bases, and cause deep political unrest among their own citizens. The plea for calm is a desperate attempt to de-escalate the conflict before that economic shockwave breaks their own domestic systems.
And the terrifying reality is that this isn't a resolved historical event. The situation remains highly uncertain. The diplomatic deadlock is still active. The warning of strong action still hangs in the air.
It does.
The geography of the strait remains the ultimate point of leverage, and people all over the world, from commodity traders to everyday consumers, are closely watching for any updates in the coming days. It's basically a geopolitical cliffhanger.
It perfectly encapsulates the friction of modern international relations. The political deadlock created a void, the natural geography of the strait provided the asymmetric leverage, and the interconnected global economy is forced to bear the totality of the risk.
Everything is deeply connected.
Which means everything is inherently fragile.
It really is incredible when you step back and look at the whole causal chain we just unpacked. It started in a quiet room with diplomats failing to reach an agreement. That failure instantly generated strategic ambiguity, vague, terrifying warnings of strong action.
Right.
Those warnings immediately turned a specific 21-mile-wide maritime choke point into the most critical piece of real estate on the planet, and the threat to that single waterway ultimately put the entire global oil supply and the base inflation rate for the whole world at absolute risk. From a failed conversation to a global economic panic, all driven by the unchangeable reality of geography.
It is a perfect storm where high-level political tension collides with immutable physical reality.
So as you go about your day, remember that this situation is highly fluid. For you listening, this isn't an abstract theory. This is an active, ongoing dynamic that could impact the price of almost everything you buy. Keep a close eye on the news in the coming days.
Oh, fly.
Watch to see if the diplomatic tension finds an off-ramp or if it escalates into something that physically impacts that vital waterway. Because as we've seen today, the distance between a failed peace talk and a global economic shock is shockingly short.
And as you watch those updates roll in, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to ponder. We just spent this time exploring how the entire global economy can be held hostage by a single 21-mile stretch of water in the Middle East.
Right.
If a single geographic choke point can dictate the base inflation rate for the entire world in a matter of hours, just how fragile is the modern global supply chain we blindly rely on every single day?
We really do think we live in a wireless, borderless world right until the exact moment someone threatens to close the door on the physical one. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.